Behind Closed Doors is a series produced by Somerset Community TV, the Skowhegan Women's Club, and the Family Violence Project. This program aims to create a dialogue around domestic violence with the help of special guests and local health professionals. We discuss the many ways our community is affected by this issue and the resources available to help curb and reduce it.
Welcome to part 4 of the series Behind Closed Doors. That is a collaboration of the Skowhegan Women's Club and many partners in the Family Violence Project. We will have a panel discussion of how domestic violence affects children today. I will have the guests who will bring their information and expertise to the topic, introduce themselves so you will know who they are and what agency they may represent, and be able to contact them in the future if you so need to. So I'll, at this time, introduce or ask the person to my right.
Hi, I'm Michelle LeClaire with Family Violence Project. I'm the community educator and community awareness and prevention educator. And I'll send it over to Kristen.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah. Hi, I'm Kristen Plummer. I work for Kennebec Valley Community Action Program on a child abuse prevention project here in Somerset County.
And I'm Mike Pike. I'm the domestic violence investigator with the Somerset County District Attorney's Office and also a part-time school resource officer with the Somerset County Sheriff's Office.
Awesome. Thank you all for being here today. So Family Violence Project, we're the Domestic Violence Resource Center serving Somerset and Kennebec counties. So I'm just going to sort of lead the conversation. Today we're going to talk about, and we say the effects of domestic violence on children, but we're trying to work on accountable language. So really talking about the effects of an abuser's actions on children.
Oh, okay.
Because it's not just like domestic violence isn't just like a house plant that's there. Domestic violence is a choice that someone is choosing to do that impacts the whole family. So I'm talking about the effects of abusers' actions on children. And as always with our program, this can bring up intense emotions, it can bring up feelings. So please feel free to call our helpline anytime. The number should be on the screen. And because advocates are here 24/7 for support, safety planning, and really just to listen too, because we have a place that, if you want to talk about what's going on, we are there, and all of our services are free and confidential. So let's dig in. So we're talking about this because do you want to talk about the month of April?
So April, yes, is National Child Abuse Prevention and Awareness Month. So we have been trying to make great childhoods happen here in Somerset County and across the nation.
Yeah, thank you. There have been activities all over Skowhegan all month, Somerset County and Kennebec County. It's been really great. And we're talking about this today because, we all know child abuse is bad and, how neglect and all those things can affect them too. And so we want to highlight also, again, abusers' actions on children because I think a lot of the time, people are trying to get through the day. They don't think about how the violence is affecting their children. Oftentimes they'll think maybe the children aren't seeing it, so they don't know it's there or they're too young to comprehend. So we want to sort of dispel some myths and also give some resources because it's a really hard thing. We know there's a lot of parental guilt already. Being a parent is the hardest job out there. So then adding in these things that you may not have control over, you still feel really guilty and shame around. And so we don't want anyone, this isn't to guilt or shame, a survivor who's doing the best they can. We want you to know that we know you're working really hard to protect yourself and protect your children. And this is informational, and please call us if you want to talk about it. And for people who are using abuse in their relationships, to know that it is affecting your children. And then you can call us too, because we're here to support you as well. Because we know that people don't want to always be that way, and it's a lot to to acknowledge that it's happening. But people can change, and we fully believe in that also. So I have some statistics. According to one source, 1 in 15 kids are exposed to DV every year. Some studies say 1 in 7 kids, and of those kids, 90% are eyewitnesses to violence. And so that adds up to being about 15 million children every year in the U.S. And then we have a study done locally. It's the Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey, and that's done all over the state, but we got the data specific to Kennebec and Somerset counties. And the question is, has violence in your home or the threat of violence ever made you want to leave your home, even for just a short while? And it's in middle school, 17.7% of kids say yes, and in high school, 22.5% of kids say yes. So, at some point, those kids aren't feeling safe in their home and wanting to be able to leave, which that's a lot. That's 1 in 5 kids.
I do want to share too, Michelle, not to interrupt. Sorry to
Yeah.
sort of take over, but so with child abuse and neglect statistics in Somerset County, so Somerset County has the highest rate of child abuse and neglect in the state. And the state average is 16 children per 1,000 by population. Somerset County is double that, so it's 32 children per 1,000. And one of the risk factors that has been identified is exposure to domestic violence for kiddos. So we know it impacts them. It impacts them, to the point of, intervention and substantiation with child abuse cases.
Yeah.
Do we have any idea why the numbers are so high for Somerset County?
I think that's an ongoing conversation about what is happening here, what are the lack of resources. So yeah. There has been an increase across the state, and so this newest round of numbers for 2018, I think most counties in the state, there may be a few that did not have an increase. And there's a lot of factors of why that is.
Well, I want to talk for just a minute about how kids can either witness it or how they get hurt by domestic violence, how they're impacted. So they may witness it at home, like we talked about with that study. And that does it impacts their feeling of safety, right? To see the fighting, to hear that, there are often harsh words spoken, and, kids internalize what they see of their parents, what their parents' beliefs are about themselves, what their parents' beliefs are about each other. Kids internalize that big time. And they also, especially when they're young, they only know they think they're impacting everything around them. So they often blame themselves for the abuse, which can be really hard for a kid in their development and their psyche. They may get hurt in their parents' arms, if it's a small child and the offending parent is battering them, they could get hurt in their parents' arms. They could get hurt trying to break up fights. That happens where a kid comes in and tries to, intervene and make the fighting stop. And that also brings up another thing that happens too, where they have to choose, do I side with my parent who's being abused, or do I side with my parent who is, doing the abuse, because it might be safer to side with that parent, which for a kid to have to choose that's a lot. And then they may also witness animal abuse, animal loss, because unfortunately animals are often part of that as well. And then, so that's all of those things are a lot for a kid.
And I think the guilt, too, that some children might feel as a result of witnessing a domestic violence-related incident in their home and feeling powerless in some ways to stop it. Just anecdotally sharing a case that I worked on recently where a woman and her child moved in with a man into his residence. They're obviously engaged in a sexual relationship, and over a short period of time, the relationship developed into physical and emotional abuse on behalf of the boyfriend, and it culminated with a really significant incident where he got drunk one night and decided that he was going to assault his girlfriend, his partner, and also threaten her and her child with a firearm. Police were called and he was subsequently arrested, but this little guy, the 8-year-old boy, witnessed this. And I had an opportunity a couple of days after the incident to sit down and interview him at school about what he had seen. And, you know, talk about insight for such a young child, but he told me that, you know, he went into the kitchen to see the boyfriend on top of his mother assaulting her, and he went over and tried to push him off his mother. And, you know, I'll never forget what he said. I tried to get him off my mom, but I was too little. I was too small. And, you know, it's heartbreaking to hear an 8-year-old have to deal with that kind of, witnessing that kind of event, first of all, but the guilt that you could tell he was feeling because he tried to help his mom and he just physically couldn't intervene.
8 years old against an adult.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, a lot of times with the cases that we see, that's kind of lost on some folks, especially abusers, is the impact that seeing that type of behavior has on them. Not only their biological children, but any stepchildren that might be in the home. And that's, you know, baggage that poor child is going to have to carry for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, it's a lot, and it's, I mean, kids, you know, the home is supposed to be the safest space, you know, for healthy development, healthy growth. You know, it affects the brain to have to be worrying about safety. And so thinking about kids, you know, witnessing that at home and then having to go to school. And that's why, you know, we hear of kids being like disruptive, you know, oh, they're so disruptive. But if they're experiencing this at home and they go to school, and school, I mean, I think our schools are a relatively safe space. You know, they feel safe there, and then, you know, they may act out because of those feelings of the turmoil, the emotion, the, you know, just all those feelings bubble up and they come out in these disruptive, you know, behaviors. So then I love the new approach of asking, you know, what happened? Not why are you doing this?
Yeah, right.
Why are you acting in this way? Asking, you know, what happened? What's going on? Like, let's talk about this and find some support, because kids aren't trying to be bad kids. You know, no one does these things just because, you know, it's because they may be experiencing something at home, or, you know, maybe, you know, it can, do you want to talk a little bit about ACEs?
Sure. Yeah. So the original ACEs study was done in the late 1990s. Two physicians were working on opposite sides of the country on different health disparities, and they, you know, came together to work on what was the original Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey, which asked 10 questions about adverse childhood experiences that people experienced. Have you been physically abused? Have you been emotionally abused? Have you witnessed your mother be abused? Was a parent incarcerated? Did you grow up in a single parent home? And so there were 10 total. When you take the survey, the higher you score in adverse childhood experiences, the more likely you are to develop chronic health conditions, more likely to be incarcerated, more likely to develop substance use disorder. And so one of those questions is around domestic violence. And the survey has changed. There have been questions added since that original study. But what we know is the more adverse childhood experiences you're exposed to as a young person, the more likely you are to develop these chronic health conditions. It's not as simple as that, though. I think what we know now is what is a protective factor, what can be preventative or preventive for young people is resilience or protective factors. And so when communities can build protective factors around families and kiddos who've experienced adversity, their outcomes are much better, right? We can see the trajectories sort of switch from those really depressing health disparities to, you know, a healthier, more supportive outcome.
And I think the study is so important to see, like, trauma affects children, you know, it affects their brains, it affects their development, it affects the way they interact with the world. And so instead of saying, oh, you're doomed to this life where you're a statistic, it's saying, okay, let's bring in these new things to help support you, and let's look at, you know, what there are, you know, the ways of healing.
And I think, for you to say that, just that switching that conversation from what's wrong with you to what happened to you, so we can better understand. And I think you talked a little bit about how kids' behavior when they've experienced trauma, you know, right? You can recognize. But also that a learning brain doesn't happen when kids experience trauma. And so not only is their behavior, outside of what they're able to control all the time, but they can't learn.
Mm-hmm.
And so kids are sitting, in school without learning brains, and that affects them, right? So they're not where their peers are.
And isn't there research too that shows that children as young as infants can be affected by trauma, repeated trauma in the home? And that's something that's, I think
Yes.
sometimes we lose sight of the fact. We think of a 2, 3, 4, 4-year-old, witnessing a traumatic event and thinking, oh, well, this is something they're going to remember. But, we don't normally assign that same mode of thinking to infants, but there is research that shows that they
Babies
can
in
be affected
utero,
too.
that
Have
moms,
to connect.
that moms when the moms are under immense stress when they're pregnant, their cortisol level changes, which affects baby's development. And I don't want to talk a lot about it, but when we talk about epigenetics and how if we've experienced trauma, it changes our genetic makeup, which then we pass on to our children. So I think there are multiple layers of how it impacts young people. But the video, First Impressions, and that it's such a powerful story about, you can probably share it better than I can.
Yes.
So there is a video that you can look up on YouTube called First Impressions. I usually look it up like First Impressions, domestic violence, and you can definitely watch it. I encourage self-care before and after, and maybe calling an advocate, because it brings up a lot. But it's incredible because it does show how the brain, especially as babies, the brain is still forming, so it's a sponge. So it's, those traumatic things. And babies are so sensitive to their mom, to the environment around them. So if a parent is stressed, they feel that, they are aware of that. They, they can't comprehend it or make sense of it, but it affects the brain. And so, little babies may be having night terrors, may be irritable, may have gastric upset, and it could be because of, witnessing trauma in the home. And even if the baby isn't being harmed due to domestic violence, just by being in that environment. And it's the kids that I've met who have, been in homes with domestic violence, they can read my face. They know if I'm in a bad mood before I even know. If I'm a little crabby or a little grumpy because it's early in the morning, they'll be like, oh, Michelle's in a bad mood. I'm going to come back later. And I'm like, what do you mean? No, I'm not. And I'm yeah, I guess I'm a little cranky, but I didn't, but they know before I am even fully aware of it. And, that's been survival, right? They've known okay, I gotta just go back to my room right now because this isn't an environment where I can ask a question or do this. And part of that too, thinking about the parents who are not batterers, their parenting can be affected by battering. They may have injuries themselves that impact their ability to, pick a child up or make food or do whatever. They may be experiencing isolation and exhaustion, which being a parent is so exhausting already. Having exhaustion from walking on eggshells all the time, or, as if someone is experiencing domestic violence, they're usually having to be very vigilant about trying to take care of their partner's needs and anticipating everything. Okay, if my partner comes home like this, we'll do this. And if they come home like this, well, maybe we can do this. And if they come home like this, I need to put my children to bed. And, I've heard people say they know how their partner is going to be by the way they shut the car door. And so to have to be so aware and so ready for everything, that is exhausting. And so that trickles down to the children too. And isolation, I think about Maine, we are so isolated,
Right.
just by virtue of it being so rural. Our winters, we're just finally getting past winter right now. Hallelujah. But there's so much isolation already. So adding on domestic violence, which creates all that isolation as well, that's hard for parents. Like, people need connection. And especially as parents, like, it is so much, it's just so much. It's a, 24/7 job.
And that's one of the protective factors is social connections. Like, we can't
Yeah.
we need friends.
Right.
We need people
Right.
we can connect with and call when we're overwhelmed or,
Right.
need a ride
Support.
somewhere. Yes, whatever that looks like for that individual.
Yeah, and some parents might discipline their child to keep them safe from their partner. Like, if they know their partner's view of what's okay and what isn't okay is going to lead to that child being disciplined more harshly, they might discipline them when they wouldn't normally, or they may keep them quiet. Kids are loud. That's the reality.
Right.
But if they know that their child is going to be disciplined by their partner for being loud, they might shush them, and the kid's like, man, I just.
Can't talk.
It really, that's limiting for, all around, and it will probably, it affects that parent. They don't want to do that, but they know they have to, and it could be used against them, like, oh, they're always disciplining the kid, they're always doing this, when they're just trying to protect their child.
Yeah.
And they may not be able to parent because the abusive partner is requiring all their attention. They might say, nope, you need to leave that crying baby because I need you. And so that can be, that definitely impacts babies because they need that. We talk about
That's true.
like coddling, like, oh, you're coddling them too much. No, like, part of that is the safe connection, that they know they're safe. They need that attachment.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we call it, like, what is that when you're like, oh, let them cry it out. And, so, I'm sure there's
Yeah.
a point, and KV CAP is a great resource for that parenting, those
Right,
milestones and how to support. But in general, especially when they're little, part of that healthy self-regulation comes from knowing that they're safe
Right.
and that they're loved.
Someone's
and,
going to be there.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I think that when we were thinking about, early studies, and it's not about domestic violence, but I'm sure that you all have seen the videos where the person is, it's sort of set up where the mom is smiling at the baby, and then the mom turns around and looks at the baby again, and the mom's not smiling, and so the baby's reaction is to cry, right? So even when we do sort of healthy studies about simple, reactions that babies have to their parents, you can, like, if you think about what that baby is experiencing when they're in an environment that people are screaming or it's loud or being roughly handled. So
Right.
you can imagine the impact on their brain development and their safety and their well-being, and I feel like it just becomes this chronic, so numerous,
It adds up.
Yes.
It definitely, if a child isn't feeling safe, you think of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like feeling safe, having food, those things that you need for your brain to function and form and grow. Like, safety is so important. So thinking about brain development, the impact, we talked about infants, how, they may have night terrors, they may be irritable, they may have, gastric upset. As they get older, the sleep problems, is, I think, one that comes up often. But having emotional distress, problems with toilet training, and this can happen too, where if kids have been toilet trained and then they regress, sometimes trauma in the house, can lead to that too. And that's one, and it's so hard because it's so frustrating. Like, wait, why is this happening? Like,
Right.
you've been toilet trained for a year, and suddenly, bedwetting or accidents happen, and it, when your brain is focused on that stress and trying to be okay, those things can regress, as well as language. Language is another part that can. Both toilet training and language can have a hard time developing because of the trauma, or witnessing trauma, which that is trauma, or they may regress because of that. And they might have a hard time separating from the parent. That's a big one too. The kids feel like they need to be around the parent all the time in order to support them and be there for them. And they may have a hard time attaching to other people, or I've also seen it where they attach to everyone and everyone's their best friend. So it can go both ways. And then as they get older, they may have trouble with schoolwork, with focus. And it's interesting because it's really similar symptoms to ADHD. And so people will be like, oh, they have ADHD, and they'll put the kids on ADHD meds. But what they're actually experiencing is symptoms of trauma and, experiencing trauma. So the meds don't work. So what do? They increase the prescription, and it doesn't help things, which is, it's frustrating for everyone, especially that child. It might be hard for them to make friends. They might isolate. They might be confused about what's socially acceptable. Thinking about kids who witness this, they might think violence is normal. So, as a 4-year-old getting kicked out of daycare because they were violent with another child, they're like, that's how I get my toy. I hit him and then I get it, because that might be what they've witnessed at home. And then the impacts, like mentally, for kids to have PTSD, stomach upset. I go back to stomach upset because chronic stress gives you such, survivors, kids, stomach upset, headaches.
Physiological problems that just, you're always carrying that burden.
That chronic stress is so hard. People being jumpy when babies will have the startle, and that continues too, like just being very jumpy. And it's hard because people think that's a joke, right? They think it's so funny. Every now and then you like come around a corner and someone's there and you jump, but then other people might be like, oh, this is hilarious. This person is really jumpy, and they think it's a joke, and they'll continue to do that. We hear this from survivors at their workplace. This has happened, and how to put that boundary down of like, no, actually, this isn't funny. This is, re-traumatizing. And I know that's not the intention, but that's how people are experiencing it,
And I think the other thing, just thinking of adverse childhood experiences and being jumpy, I think, that we know our sort of stress function in our body is, working when we startle to something, when it's scary. And I think for people who experience chronic trauma, that gets out of whack. And so they don't always recognize when something is unsafe, because everything has been unsafe. So, when there's a malfunction to our stress response, because our entire lives have been stress, and that can happen. And I think especially for kids, when, there's the movie Paper Tigers and Resilience, and it talks about the difficulty in recognizing when a situation is unsafe, because there's a chronic trauma.
And so looking at trauma and how that affects things, if someone is constantly in a state of crisis, if your brain, if you, I'm trying to articulate like what trauma does to the brain as far as like the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, like, you may have a fight or flight response that is not the norm. Like if you bump into someone in the hall, and you may perceive that as an unsafe thing because this person just, hit shoulders with you, and you might go from like 0 to 10 because, is this person a threat? Is that, I've worked with kids before where they've had to, everything's been fight or flight, and that's been survival. So things that wouldn't technically be a problem because, it was just a busy hallway and you hit, they're like, you want to fight? Like, what is this? This is a challenge, because that's been how they've kept themselves safe. And so having to retune that fight or flight to like, because kids, their prefrontal cortex isn't fully formed, so it goes from like, it just goes to panic because it doesn't have that moment to sit in the prefrontal cortex and say, is this an emergency? Is this a situation where I'm in danger? It just goes to like, what's happening? Like, I'm ready for a fight, or I'm ready to run, and that's just where it goes. So just, it changes the way the brain works sometimes. So talking about, let's see. So this is not a life sentence. that is one of the things that the ACEs has really worked hard to talk about too. And all this, a lot of times people will be like, well, it's hereditary, you know, this is what, you know, I know my partner saw this as a kid and this is why they are the way they are. And now my kid, this is what's going to happen to them. You know, people will often say that. We don't like that statement because everyone gets to choose what they do. Because just because someone grew up with that doesn't mean they become an abuser. And it's not like an excuse. You know, people may experience trauma, and that's not their fault. But it is their responsibility to heal from that, and it's our responsibility as a community to support that healing and create those spaces where people can have that support. So this can change. Resiliency is huge. I know that's a big buzzword, but it's so important.
It absolutely is.
So trying to figure that out, you know, safety planning with children can be a really powerful thing. You know, even just talking about the violence is so important. Being able to talk to the child about, you know, let's talk about that. How did that feel? Yeah, that was really scary. You know, being able to validate those feelings of fear. And I think about, you know, little boys who in this world, you know, for men, we don't give them the options of fear or, you know, as an option of a feeling. But like this kid who's witnessed this, that is probably a very valid feeling. Right. So being able to let them express that fear, express that sadness is really important. You know, validate those feelings, maybe make a safety plan where they go to their room if something's going on and put headphones on or watch a program on their tablet or phone, you know, just to be away from that. And I mean, help them in knowing how to call 911 and maybe when to, which is really scary, but that's the reality. You know, that can be the reality sometimes, or maybe have them go to a neighbor's house. Having relationships with healthy adults, that is like the one thing, right? Do you want to?
It's the magic, right? I mean, study after study has said that's the turning point, is having a relationship with at least one healthy adult in your life. Yes.
So
and that can be a challenge, you know, for certain families. But you know, one of the things I try to tell students that I speak to about this is, you know, that trusting adult doesn't necessarily have to be an immediate family member.
True.
It can be a neighbor. It can be a teacher. It can be even be a police officer. Somebody that that you trust and, you know, feel comfortable sharing with. So it doesn't necessarily, you know, if you don't have that resource or that stability within your home, there are other ways you can get that.
yeah.
And I don't know, can Mike share a little bit about school resource officer
Sure.
and what your role is?
Sure. When I'm asked to describe what I do as the school resource officer, I generally like to say I'm a big brother in a uniform.
Sure.
I want children to feel safe and secure when I show up at their school. And it's interesting because when I first started doing this about 6 years ago, first school I went to, very first day, I pulled in and went into the office and said hi, and the secretary got 2 or 3 phone calls from parents
Sure.
who were also dropping their kids off at the time I get there. What's going on? Is somebody in trouble? Is there something going on at school? And, you know, I think adults and kids probably look at it the same way. A police officer shows up in uniform in a police cruiser, and they think, oh, something bad has happened, or somebody's in trouble. And, you know, it's interesting over time, you know, as I made my visits more and more frequently, you know, how that thinking changed. Oh, it's, you know, now it's Officer Pike. It's not, oh, who did something wrong or who's in trouble. And that's a good thing. That's how I want children to view the police, is, you know, as a safe place or a feeling of safety, and not, you know, anxiety or concern about somebody might have done something wrong or somebody's in trouble. Because actually dealing with enforcement is a very minuscule part of what I do. It's more role modeling, speaking to children in classrooms about safety and self-esteem and bullying, and you know, again, just kind of being that positive role model, the big brother in a uniform, not the scary police officer that's there to you know, put you in handcuffs and haul you away. That's really not what the SRO program is
No.
about.
And it's wonderful. You know, we've
Right.
heard of cases where kids whose parents have been affected by violence have been able to talk to the school resource officer and get their parents support that way, because you know there is so many reasons people may not call the police, you know, out of fear of their, you know, what their abuser will do. You know, if they have other charges for things, you know, they might be like, it's not safe for me to call the police. And so having this place where kids can talk to and get that support, and also bring in support in this indirect way for their parents, can be really, it's amazing. It's life changing. So
Right.
I really appreciate you and all the other school resource officers that, you know, get to know kids and, you know, are the safe space, because the police are supposed to be a safe, you know,
Right.
place.
Help.
Yeah, they're there for help, they're there for support, they do so much in our communities.
And I can imagine that it ripples like from the kids to the parents. Like the parents aren't just saying, "Oh, it's Officer Pike," but if their kids come home and share a good experience they've had with law enforcement, then that ripples, you know, to other people in their lives.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
And it's interesting. It's rewarding to be able to feel those barriers fall when you first meet a kiddo that maybe I haven't met before, or hasn't been exposed to a school resource officer before. You know, they're kind of curious, but they're, you know, hesitant about coming over and talking. And you know, I try to, you know, playfully interact and get them to feel more comfortable. Because it's important that they know that that we're there for them if they ever need us.
And as a person, like, I think about people in the world, like we all have such an impact on each other.
Right.
And thinking of people in power, which police officers, educators, even though it doesn't feel like you may have power, like you do, and kids feel that. So if you're positive towards kids, you know, I think about teachers who nurture kids, you know, they feel that. They're like, oh, this teacher noticed me, this
Right.
school, this police officer noticed me and said that, you know, they saw me do something nice, and that, you know, that affects their identity so positively. And, you know, it takes them out of this space of like being at home and witnessing this abuse and thinking, you know, A, it's their fault, you know, B, this, you know, if their parent is telling their other parent how bad they are and how stupid and how this or that, they, you know, they take that on. It becomes part of their identity. So having those healthy relationships to be like, no, you are your person and this is who you are. And, you know, it really builds them back up. I think of Soul Lost, maybe I'll lose people with this. It's hippy dippy. But like, you know, witnessing that, it takes a little piece of you or experiencing that. And people in the community can sort of give that back, you know.
Absolutely.
It's really,
Yeah.
it's, I know I'm a little woo woo. I'll admit it, but I think
It's
that
true,
part
the
is
balance.
true. Yeah,
Yes, absolutely.
like we need to build each other up.
Yeah. And we can't carry it alone.
Right.
No.
And it doesn't take a lot of effort. I mean, I think people tend to underestimate the impact they can have on someone, especially a
Right.
child.
Right.
You know, it doesn't have to be a lengthy interaction or you know, a big production. It can just be simply one of the things that I do a lot with my SRO program is if I talk to a kiddo about an issue because they're having trouble at home, I'll say, you know, is it okay if I just check in with you now and again to see how you're doing? I ask that permission to
Right.
give them, you know, let them feel empowered, but it's also letting them know that, you know, there is an adult that cares about them and is willing to listen. And that's been pretty successful. But anyone can do that. It doesn't have to be a police officer. It can be a parent. It can be anyone in the community that has a concern for kids.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead.
Well, no, and I think that's true if we could just expand that to families, right? Like we as a community need to support, and I think about this when I think about the high rate of child abuse and neglect in Somerset County, that we all have the responsibility to support families so that kiddos can grow up in safe, loving, nurturing homes. And it's not just service providers. It's, you know,
Right.
we all, you know, need to reach out to a mom at the grocery store that we see having a hard time, or, you know, if we can help someone, you know, with a meal or gas or a ride or clothing or diapers or any of those things to help reduce the stress of parenting. as a result, make a healthier, happier community.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, relationships, they really, I mean, we all want connection. We all need connection. That is, that's crucial. And then for other resources, I think of like counseling. Counseling can be really helpful for kids to just give them their own space to speak with a professional. I know the waiting lists are really long, unfortunately, but there are avenues to do that. And then supports in the community. We at Family Violence Project have a CPS liaison. So if Child Protective Services gets involved, which they often do if there's domestic violence, if they feel like the child is in danger. And so they may not, we are there as a support for the client who's involved, and also, to support them in talking to CPS about domestic violence, because the non-offending parent may be charged with failure to protect, but at the end of the day, they aren't the one causing the abuse. And so really working with that non-offending parent to support them, because they may call themselves and say, my partner is doing this stuff and I don't know how to stop it. Or maybe after they've separated, when the child is with visits with the other partner, because as we know, we talk about domestic violence, everyone thinks the answer is leaving, but just because people leave, it doesn't mean the abuse stops. We have a whole post-separation power and control wheel, because after the relationship ends, there's still power and control. It's still, very dangerous, especially in the beginning. But when the other parent has the children, they can still do power and control in so many ways. And so many people, not everyone, but a lot of people experience it, where now their partner has the children and, they get the kids back, and maybe, they're unkempt, they are starving, they are acting out and having all kinds of behaviors because of being with this parent who they don't know exactly what's going on. They've always, in the relationship, were able to protect them, but now that it's over, they can't protect them. So, they may themselves call CPS because maybe their partner is, abusing someone else now, or maybe they're abusing the children. But CPS gets involved and they're like, well, you aren't protecting them, or they sometimes will blame the partner who's not doing the abuse. So, that went on a tangent, but either way, we are there to support survivors who are working with CPS. So we have a CPS liaison, so you can call our helpline and be connected with that person also. What are the resources that KVCAP has? We've talked about protective factors a couple of times.
So we have tried to wrap our services in 5 protective factors, which are social connections, concrete supports in times of need, parental resilience, knowledge of parenting and child development, and social and emotional competence of children. So we have KVCAP has Maine Families, which is a free home visiting program that starts working with moms and dads prenatally, and can work with families until their child turns 3. It's open to any. There's no income qualifications. You can have Maine Families for multiple children, which is an awesome program. They do some really fun stuff. We offer a parent support group the second Tuesday of every month. It's called Parent to Parent, and we use a curriculum called the Circle of Parents, and we offer parent classes, so prenatal classes, substance abuse and recovery classes, nurturing fathers classes. We have play groups, one in Skowhegan and one in Bingham. The one in Bingham's on Monday, the one in Skowhegan's on Friday. We have a diaper bank, we have clothing, we have support to, resource navigators, so we can connect people who can help people get things like washing machines or beds or car repairs, things like that. We offer a lot of strategies for, alternatives to spanking, or, if your 2-year-old is being especially challenging, what are some strategies you can use to, help parent. So that is, we offer a lot more. We are having I'm just going to put a little plug in
Yeah.
for our community baby shower
Okay.
on June 1st. So we are first ever in Somerset County, or I think maybe beyond that, but free community baby shower for any expectant or new families in the area. We're giving away 75 free welcome baby bags that have things like safe sleep sacks and books and sneakers and toys and burp cloths and bibs and
Wonderful.
yeah.
Mhm.
It's at the Methodist Church on the Dr. Mann Road, and it's going to be a whole bunch of fun.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Who can they call? I wonder if we should give the phone number so they can like
Yeah.
have that on the screen.
Yeah,
True.
you can. I'll
Mhm.
give you my phone number.
Mhm.
Called KV Cap.
Yeah.
Edit that out.
Right. No.
There's also Maine Families. I consider Kristen my family expert. So Maine Families, they do
Pardon.
home visiting.
Yeah.
Do you want to?
A
Oh,
little bit.
sorry.
Yeah.
I can talk about it
But
more.
up to 3, right?
Yeah,
At
up to
age
3. Yes. And KV Cap also has, although I'm not an expert on this program, but for when kids do age out of Maine Families, we can, or if a parent wants to enroll outside of our enrollment, open enrollment, because it has to happen by the time a child is a certain age.
Sure.
KV Cap's Children and Family Services also has a home visiting program that can enroll kids outside of our age group, so we can help families access those home visiting programs as well.
Nice. And Educare. Did you check?
Educare. So Educare is the Head Start program attached to the George Mitchell School in Waterville,
Okay, right.
and it serves kiddos 6 weeks to 5. Again, I don't know a lot about Educare. Although it is an amazing program in an amazing building. We do have a early Head Start program here in Somerset County that serves a little under 20 kiddos. And that's 6 weeks to 3 years. And then KV Cap runs pre-K programs for RSU 54 and then surrounding towns in Somerset County.
Yeah, there's a lot of different resources. It's, yeah, and it's hard to access them sometimes. Like it feels, it's hard to ask for help, and so know that we're here, we're friendly. Hopefully, seeing our faces helps. Some at Family Violence Project, we have our 24-hour helpline. You can call anytime just to talk. We're there to listen. We're there to hear what's going on. All of our services are free and confidential. If there is a child in danger, we are mandated reporters, but we talk about that with you, when you call. We have emergency shelters in Kennebec and Somerset County. We do individual advocacy in person if you want to come in, and also court advocacy. So if someone is wanting protection from abuse order or going through parental rights and responsibilities, we're there to talk to you and sort of explain some of the paperwork. We aren't lawyers, so we can't give you legal advice, but we're there to be with you through the process because it is challenging. And we can go and sit in court with you if you're facing your abuser while you're getting your PFA, because that's very challenging. We also have community education, so we go into schools and we talk about the little kids about sharing, and as they get older talk about healthy relationships, how to break up, all the things that you're learning and you don't know how to do and people don't talk about very much, so we try to start that conversation. We also do community education. That's what we're doing right now. We go to different events around town and do tabling and do education classes. And we also do batterers intervention groups. Oh, we have support groups too. I love talking about support group because it's the most amazing place to get support. I know as advocates, we can talk about things, but hearing it from other people who are going through the same thing is so incredible. And then, yes, also the batterer intervention groups, which are for folks who have used violence in their relationship. They're often court mandated, but people can go by choice. If it's something that you're like, I'm doing this and I never wanted to do this. You may say, I saw my parent do this and I swore I would never do this to my partner, but I am. You know, you can go to those groups as well, because this happens and we don't want it to, and you don't want it to. So being able to go to the groups, and they really look at that belief system. You know, why is it that I believe I'm entitled to this, you know, to treat my partner this way? And then, so really challenging that and trying to figure out how to do it differently and how to change that belief system. There's men's work, which we facilitate, and then we co-facilitate the female batterer intervention group with a local agency as well. And, you know, there's so much to it. It takes a community.
Right.
You know, I really can't stress enough about the coordinated community response. So we do trainings in the communities. We have advocates that go to other shelters and go to hospitals, because it really takes everyone, teachers, healthcare, the court system, the faith community, you know, everyone
Right.
to do this. You know, counseling for children and parents. And we, I just want to say too, we do not recommend couples counseling if there's any abuse in a relationship, just because, you know, couples counseling is supposed to be a safe space.
Yeah.
And if one partner doesn't feel safe, then oftentimes, you know, they can be seen as not being cooperative, and maybe the counselor and the partner who's offending could gang up on them and tell them they're doing, you know, not doing enough.
Right.
Or conversely, if they think it's safe because it's supposed to be, they may share and then at home pay for it later.
Right.
So we don't recommend couples counseling if there's ever any abuse. But yeah, parenting classes, family and friends, you know, getting family and friends on board to support, like,
Right.
you know, whether it's taking the kid out to go do, I mean, I think about, you know, kids love adventure and it builds you
Yes.
up.
Yeah.
Every kid, you know, doing different things builds that confidence, builds their identity. So having that special time, like, and kids love adult attention,
Right.
you know,
Sure do.
they want to hang out with adults. They're cool, you know, so having a safe, healthy adult relationship does so much, so much.
And it gives parents a break.
Yes,
Right.
it-
Right.
say that
Right.
louder,
And
gives
that's-
parents a break,
Yeah.
because parenting is so hard
It
all the
is.
time.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if Mike, what is your role? Like, what is the domestic violence investigator? Like what?
So my primary responsibility is when we receive a new DV case at the district attorney's office, and the DA's office is the entity that's responsible for representing the state in court. So a police officer working for a municipal or county or state police agency might make an arrest for a DV related offense. The officer will complete his or her report, send it to our office. The prosecutor will look at it, and if any follow-up needs to be done, or there are specific concerns pertaining to this individual case, I'll get assigned to work on it. So some of the things that I traditionally will do is work with survivors on safety planning, make the appropriate referrals to Family Violence Project if that hasn't already been done, make the appropriate referrals to DHHS if that hasn't already been done, because we all fall under the same mandated reporter rules. I'll monitor compliance with bail conditions for the accused that are on pre-conviction bail, meaning they have to abide by certain conditions pending their next court appearance after their initial arrest. A lot of times that will entail not having any contact with the victim or going to his or her residence, place of employment, or place of education. Sometimes it does also extend to minor children that were involved in the offense. And the thing that I really find the most rewarding about it is, I mean, if ever there was a case scenario where you could really have an impact and hopefully change someone's life for the better, it's domestic violence. And one of the other things that I really try to do, especially with survivors that I work with, is try to help overcome the fear of the unknown. A lot of survivors, you know, will tell me, you know, I've been a victim of abuse for years, but I've never felt comfortable reaching out because I didn't really know who to turn to. And especially if you're not familiar with how our court system works, that can be pretty
Daunting.
intimidating, pretty daunting. How to obtain a protection order, for example. I mean, where do you begin? If you've never been through that before, you don't have somebody that's got experience with that that can kind of guide you through that process. I mean, those are some pretty big barriers that we work to try to overcome. And much like with the school resource officer job that I do, same with survivors. I'll check in with them. Hey, how you doing? Do you have any questions? This is what's going on with their case. We also have a victim witness advocate that works in the DA's office, Sheena, who does a tremendous job. She also will work with victims of all crimes, not just domestic violence, but we work very closely together to keep victims or survivors informed what's going on with their case. We don't want this to be a mystery for them. We want them to feel supported, like the system is working for them to hold the offender accountable. And if they choose later on to reunite with the offender, hopefully once they're done with their involvement in the system, they're safer for it.
Right.
And that's part of working with Family Violence Project with the Certified Batterers Intervention Program and DV Court and the advocates and support groups that you offer.
I so want to talk more. I know we're running out of time because hearing about all these reasons, all these things that can happen to kids, all this trauma, people might be like, well, why is the person staying in that relationship? And I think that happens a lot when you hear about domestic violence. Why are they staying? Why don't they just leave? And so I think we'll take a couple minutes just to talk about that real quick, just because that conversation, especially with a survivor, isn't always helpful because it's not about staying or leaving.
And if I could interject, Michelle, one of the ways I explain it, because I'll have survivors that will say, I feel so stupid because I put up with it for so long and I didn't know what to do. And I, want to kind of break it down because I like simplicity and I like to be able to illustrate things simply. I'll say, if you're walking down the street and a complete stranger walks up to you and punches you or pushes you down to the ground, it would be very easy for you to pick up the phone and call the police and have that person charged because, how dare this person who I don't know, invade my space and put their hands on me. You would want them prosecuted to the full extent of the law. But the difference between that and domestic violence situations is you have that piece, but you also have all this other stuff that goes along with it. The love, the caring, the children. And, it's not all bad.
Right.
Sometimes you'll have years, even decades of really loving, positive stuff going on in these relationships, financial ties and family ties, in addition to the violence, and it just really clouds and complicates things. So it's not cut and dry, and it's not just as easy as saying, well, why don't you leave? I would leave if somebody did that to me. Until you have a chance to be exposed to it, be around it, work in that field, it's really maybe something that just the average person doesn't understand.
Right. And I think they don't, because it's easy to say, I would just leave, but there's so many reasons why that's not safe to do, why it's not an option. And so just understanding that isn't a supportive question to ask or a supportive thing to say if someone comes to you and discloses that they're experiencing this, or if a kid, if you're working with a child who says that this is going on at home, instead of blaming the parent for staying, really it's taking a step back and recognizing the complexity of the situation, because leaving is generally the most dangerous time when there's abuse happening. 75% of the homicides that happen can happen either when the person is trying to leave or just, you know, in the year after leaving. So that's very terrifying. So the danger to begin with, and then there's, you know, they may be homeless after, there may be financial abuse happens in 99% of of domestic abuse relationships. So not having resources to leave, you know, that isolation piece, they've been cut off from family and friends, so they may not have those resources available to them. They may be scared of what will happen to the kids. You know, my partner will still get visits and I won't be there to protect them or take care of them or feed them. That's a huge one.
Yeah, sure. And I think when Mike was talking about his job at the DA's office and his desire to keep people informed of what's going on so they're not in the dark, and I think about, you know, when people are in a relationship that involves abuse, they know almost. I don't want to say it too simplistically, but, you know, they can predict what's going to happen. And when they leave, they never know, like, is he following me? Or is, you know, what's going to happen? So when you're there and present, you're almost prepared, you know, like it's this.
You know where your partner is. You're able to monitor them. But if you leave, then you're always looking over your shoulder, wondering if they're going to be there, seeing the car drive by, wondering what's going to happen. You know, stalking often happens, and it can be done by family members or friends, other people too. And that just is constantly, and I think if social media complicates it too. So there are so many reasons why people stay in relationships where there's abuse, and they just being in a relationship is not causing the abuse. The abuser is choosing to abuse. So please, you know, I encourage you to do some reading on that. Call us and talk to us. And as a friend or loved one, or a friend or family member of a loved one who's being abused, we're here to support you too, because it is hard. It does feel helpless. And so we're here for you as well to talk about those things. So any last thoughts?
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much to the Women's Club for organizing this. Thank you to our guests. And thank you, Channel 11. And thank you all for watching. We appreciate having these discussions.